I'm going to rank all 34 gaming laptops that I've tested this year from best to worst using this tier list. The way it works is simple. There are 7 different tiers, with F being the worst and S being the best. What does S mean? Isn't A the best, I hear you ask? Well, according to the famous historian Wikipedia, S means super or superb. Basically, it's the best. I've got all the gaming laptops that I've tested on the right-hand side, but I can only fit 15 at a time. But don't worry, there are 34 there. All of these gaming laptops want a piece of that S tier action, but there's been some fierce competition this year. So let's find out which models make the cut and where the rest end up. Just some quick disclaimers before we begin. This video is not sponsored by anyone. All of these are my own opinions based on my testing on all laptops throughout the year. I'm also not saying that S tier is perfect. Nothing in life is perfect. There's always going to be trade-offs. Something that works amazing for one person won't be what someone else needs. Everyone's got different needs, so you've got to make those trade-offs yourself. So obviously, as a result, all of my rankings are going to be biased based on my own personal experience and time testing these laptops. So if I rank something low, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't buy it. And if I say that your laptop sucks, then just relax. These are only my opinions and thoughts. They can't hurt you. I'm also probably going to end up reordering some of the laptops as we go through the list, because I might get to a laptop that forces me to change the ranking of something we've already looked at. So basically, you're just going to have to watch the whole video. Alright, let's go. Alright, so the first laptop is ASUS Helios 300. If you saw my recent review of this, you probably know we're off to a rough start. Now in 2019, this laptop probably would have been A or S tier. It was honestly that good back when there just wasn't that much competition and it was priced reasonably. But Acer just hasn't really changed the Helios in the last couple of years, and it's pretty expensive these days. At least in my region. I think in the US it is actually one of the cheaper options for a 3060. Now for the specific model that I tested, I'm probably going to have to give this one an E. And this is just due to the low GPU power limit, the single channel memory, and the screen in mine was honestly quite terrible in all regards. Now to be fair, in many regions the Helios is available with a better screen and dual channel memory, so in that case I probably would end up bumping it up to a C. But in the specific case of the model that I've tested, yeah, I'm just gonna have to give it an E. I was considering an F, but yeah, I guess that's a bit rough because if you do use an external screen or upgrade to dual channel memory, it does end up being fairly decent. The gaming performance just isn't that great as there's no MUX switch, and the front edge of the laptop can feel sharp. So yeah, just E tier for me. Next up, we've got the Acer Nitro 5, which is meant to be a more budget-friendly option compared to the Helios. So based on that, you might think it would make sense to put it below the Helios, but I'm actually gonna put it above with a D. And the reason for that is, unlike the Helios, the Nitro actually ends up being fairly well priced. To be fair, I did review the 3060 model, but that entry-level 1650 model for like $600 US is pretty competitive. Not only that, but the screen in my Nitro ended up being better than the one in my Helios. It was brighter and had better response time. Now to be fair, the build quality of the Nitro obviously isn't as good as the metal on the Helios, and the reason that I didn't put the Nitro higher is because it still came to me with single channel memory. Again, this might vary by region, but yeah, single channel memory in a gaming laptop with 3060 graphics in 2021 is just automatically a low tier for me. You know, just now that I think about it, I think Acer was the only company in the whole year that actually shipped any laptops to me with single channel memory. I think all the other companies have just woken up to the fact that using 2 sticks of memory can give you a good performance in games. So that's good to see, and I hope it's somewhere Acer improves in the future. Next up is the Alienware M15 R5, which is the AMD model. Next up we've got the R6, which is the Intel version. So both laptops are basically the same, just with different processors. I didn't review this one that well because it had some issues, such as it was missing 10% of the CUDA cores with the 3070 model, and initially when I had it for review it also had no MUX switch, but Alienware did make that available in a BIOS update. So compared to what I showed in my original videos, this would actually perform a fair bit better these days. But I mean, at the same time, Alienware was shipping this laptop to customers in that state that I reviewed it in, so it's not as if they just sent me an early unit or something. It's like they were making customers the guinea pigs. Along with the fact that the Alienware software just feels clunky and takes like a minute to load up after boot, I think I'm gonna go and give this one a D. And that's also partly due to the higher price. At least in my country, the Alienware models are honestly kind of a ripoff compared to the competition. So yeah, that does seem like a bit of a low rating, but I just had too many problems with it to put it higher. But in terms of like raw gaming performance with all of the updates that are available today, it would probably be more like a C or a B. It just depends if you want to spend that much more money and deal with the crap software. So likewise for the Intel R6 model, I think I'll also give it the same rating as it is basically the same laptop after all. Due to the Intel CPU, technically it will probably perform better in games compared to AMD, but the battery life will also be worse. Though the Intel model does also have faster PCIe Gen 4 and Thunderbolt 4, so it depends if you care about those features and if you want battery life as to whether or not you should pick AMD or Intel. Also, I guess if you want more justification, generally those Alienware laptops do run hotter compared to most others. But I guess this is a trade-off too, because generally higher temperatures are a result of high power limits, which usually does mean better performance. Oh, actually I just remembered I also had problems with the R6 in terms of the display display outputs. There were weird things like DisplayPort on Type-C not working, and the HDMI port was slower on games for some reason. So yeah, just weird issues. Anyway, long story short, Alienware gets a D. Next up is the ASUS Flow X13, which is basically their 13-inch Ryzen tablet. This one was kind of interesting because I've never seen an 8-core Ryzen CPU in a 13-inch gaming laptop before. I think I'll give this one a B just because it's good to see a company actually trying something new that hasn't been done before. Because this is also the laptop that you can get with the XG Mobile, which is ASUS's external graphics. And that's something that hasn't really been made available to AMD laptops before because, as far as I'm aware, none of them support Thunderbolt right now. And ASUS gave the X13 a dedicated PCIe port. And I've shown in a different video that ends up performing better than a desktop graphics card with Thunderbolt because bandwidth matters with eGPUs. Now that said, this unique design does of course result in an extremely high price. So I could definitely bump this down due to the high price. But I think higher price is just expected when you're getting so much power in a small form factor. Another negative would be the lack of upgradability because as a smaller 13-inch laptop, there's not a whole lot once you open it up and get inside. But yeah, at the same time, I guess if you are investing in the XG Mobile eGPU ecosystem, technically if ASUS does make a XG Mobile in the future with say NVIDIA 40 series or whatever ends up being next, you could use that to expand the lifespan of the model. So yeah, I guess there are a fair few negatives, so I could bump this down to a C later, but for now let's just leave it as a B. Next up is the ASUS Scar 15. So this was one of the first models I reviewed this year with NVIDIA RTX 30 series graphics. If I recall, mine had a 3080, and that's with Ryzen processor, so I was pretty impressed at the time because prior to that, I don't think I'd ever had any AMD gaming laptops that had graphics higher than RTX 2060. So pretty much early on in the year, this is what everyone was asking for, a high-end Ryzen gaming laptop. Oh wait, hang on, this is the one that has the RGB light bar, so obviously straight to S tier. No, I'm just joking. Probably more like a C, I think. There are some problems with this model. The thing that gets me the most is, with that light bar, when you open the laptop, it's got two ribbon cables that connect the light bar to the motherboard. And I might have actually broken one when I opened it up before without thinking about it. And if that's something I've done, I guarantee you many other people out there that have bought this laptop have probably done it too. Other laptops that have a light bar, like say the MSI GE76, just have the light bar built into the bottom of the laptop, so this isn't a concern. So hopefully this is something ASUS can improve in a future model, because that is pretty annoying. Not only that, but the Scar 15 also doesn't have a webcam. That's not much of a deal breaker for me personally, but I know for most people in human malware times when you're in Zoom meetings, not having a webcam is kind of a deal breaker. I mean, if you really need a camera built in, this might automatically be F tier for you. Things I did like about the Scar 15 though were the mechanical keyboard and Type-C charging, which is something that ASUS did put into a lot of their laptops this year. It's also got liquid metal for cooling on the CPU, which could be a positive or a negative depending on how you look at it. Obviously the positive is, in theory, it gives you better cooling and performance, but the negative is, how's that going to be to maintain in the future? Do you need to replace it? I think there are just some unknowns there that we're not really going to know about until people have had these laptops for 1, 2, 3, 5 years. And as of right now, this model isn't even a year old, so it's a bit too early to say. Alright, next up is the ASUS Strix G15 AAA, which is the Advantage Edition, so all AMD with both AMD CPU and GPU. And like the Scar 15, this also has that RGB light bar, so straight to S tier. But seriously, I'm going to give this one at least a B because it's a seriously competitive gaming laptop. The RX 6800M graphics ends up performing somewhere between NVIDIA 3070 and 3080 graphics. But it's the price of this laptop that's seriously impressive. It's constantly $1,650 at Best Buy. And paying that much money for gaming performance above RTX 3070 is pretty impressive. Now, there are some problems with this laptop. The first one is that mine shipped with slower X16 memory. Some people have said that theirs came with X8, which is great, so it might just be a bit of a dice roll. It also doesn't have a mux switch. I mean, the Scar 15 also doesn't have a mux switch, and that would boost gaming performance. But for the lower price point, I can kind of forgive it because, I mean, to be fair, adding extra hardware does increase complexity, and it would make sense that that would boost the cost. And let's face it, if you do really want to boost the performance, you could still connect an external screen and get that benefit anyway. This laptop also doesn't have a camera, so yeah, I could see some people automatically writing it off as F tier if you do require that. I was actually considering giving this laptop a higher rating, but some people have contacted me lately saying that it just randomly turns off. Now, I think this is still a bit of a developing story that I'm keeping an eye on, but I've tested 2 of these models myself and I didn't have this problem. Now, that's obviously not to say it's not something that exists, but yeah, I don't think it's something I'll be able to replicate unless I happen to get bad luck and get a model that has this problem. I'm just trying to say that a few people have contacted me mentioning that their laptop randomly turns off. So yeah, it's something that might be an issue with it. Not sure yet. You know, just thinking about it, I have actually been contacted by more than 5 people in the last month, so there might be something to this. So just for now, I think I'll bump it down to a B with the Scar 15. I mean, in a lot of ways, these laptops are very similar, just one is the AMD graphics graphics. Next up is the ASUS TUF A15. This one's going to be pretty controversial if you saw the hardware unboxed video last year where they cut open the bottom with a Dremel to improve airflow. Fortunately, this year's model has been improved and there's more ventilation holes underneath directly above the fans. Unfortunately, I couldn't directly compare whether or not thermals were improved because this had different specs than last year's model. But at the same time, at least ASUS did appear to make an effort to address this. Now mine had RTX 3070 graphics and it was on the lower side for a 3070. I think many 3060s ended up doing better than it. This is meant to be more of a budget-friendly option, so it kind of makes sense that it doesn't have a mux switch. And it did also have insane battery life, to be fair. It was one of the best gaming laptops I've ever tested, which I think is thanks to the Ryzen processor, because generally Ryzen gaming laptops always have better battery life than Intel, at least based on my own personal testing. I think I'm gonna have to put this one in the D tier. I would give it the C, but yeah, it doesn't really make sense to give it the same rating as the Scar 15 and the Strix G15 Advantage. At the end of the day, it is more of a budget-friendly option, which I suppose probably competes more with things like the Nitro 5 anyway. Oh, and I guess unlike the two ASUS laptops in the C tier, the A15 does at least have a camera. Next up is the ASUS TUF Dash F15, and I've used the Intel logo there on the laptop as the featured image for this one just because it's got that quad-core i7. You just know there's going to be that guy in the comments who's like, bro, you only need 4 cores for gaming. No. Personally, I think this one goes straight to E tier. Let's talk about it a bit and see if it gets an F. So yeah, there's that quad-core i7, and I have shown that this does hold back gaming quite a bit. My Dash F15 did come with RTX 3070 graphics, and as this laptop is meant to be a thinner design, it makes sense that it has the lowest possible power limit. So a lower power limit 3070 basically means you end up paying more money just to get a 3070, whereas many other cheaper 3060 gaming laptops end up performing better than it. Personally, I don't really see the point of a thin gaming laptop. I mean, obviously portability is cool and everything, but there are gaming laptops that are similar size that still fit 6-core, sometimes even 8-core CPUs that perform better. Now I know the TUF series is meant to be more budget friendly, but at the same time, I would have preferred just a 2 or 3 millimeter thicker machine with high power limits. But that's just me personally. Maybe you really want a thinner machine and the Dash F15 is perfect for you. I still really can't get over the fact that Intel were calling a quad-core an i7 in 2021. Seriously, what? Oh, and this laptop also has memory soldered to the motherboard, which is generally what we see in the ASUS Zephyrus series, and yeah, I guess that might be required for ASUS to get the laptop this thin, but at the same time it does kind of reduce upgradability. Oh, and again, this is another ASUS laptop that doesn't have a camera, so not ideal in terms of human malware times. Basically just too many negatives for me to put this any higher than an E. I kind of want to put it in an F just because, come on, that quad-core i7, like what was Intel thinking? I know that's not really ASUS's fault, but I mean, they used it. You know what? That just might end up being the worst laptop of the year. I don't know, I could go either way, E or F. Let's leave it as F for now because I think the Helios 300 is probably better than the Dash F15, despite all the problems the Helios has. So that's saying something. Alright, next up is the ASUS Zephyrus G14. So this one first came out last year, and then this year they refreshed it with new CPU, new GPU, and if I recall, better screen, with at least half the response time compared to last year. So definitely some good changes, but as I always say when anyone asks me if they should go for the G14, my response is generally that you're going to be paying more money for portability, so it really depends on how much you care about being portable. I know for some people that extra portability will automatically put this up in S tier, regardless of how much more you have to pay for it. But for me personally, I think I might go B, so let's stick it next to that 13-inch ASUS Flow X13 for now. So I think it's a good little laptop, but as mentioned, you're obviously paying more for the smaller size. Anytime you need to fit modern hardware in a smaller form factor, you're paying more money. That's just the way tech works. Now, I would consider putting this lower because generally you can get pretty much any 15-inch gaming laptop ever that costs less money and will outperform this. I mean, even technically that Dash F15 down the bottom might end up doing better than the G14. I can't actually remember the results. But yeah, my point is this one's really only worth considering if you really want that portability and smaller size. Now, if I recall, mine had RTX 3060 graphics with the lowest power limit available from Nvidia, so 60 watts. So it was definitely one of the worst performing 3060 laptops, but at the same time, we kind of have to forgive it for being such a small machine. But yeah, it's like I said, you can get a 15-inch laptop with a higher tier 3060 that will perform better. At the same time though, despite the smaller power limit, this 14-inch gaming laptop was still running all games with high settings perfectly fine. So although there is better performance available, for a 14-inch machine, it was still doing pretty good. And you know what, there aren't a whole lot of 14-inch laptops out there, and like I said with the 13-inch Flow X13, it's nice to see ASUS trying different things. Oh, and this also doesn't have a camera. Ugh, classic ASUS. I guess I could kind of see it going down to a C due to that. I guess there are a few negatives there. I don't know. Let's go with C for now, but I could also justify it being a B. All right, next up we've got the ASUS Zephyrus G15, and if I recall, I think Dave2D said this was his favorite laptop of the year, so straight to F tier. All right, onto the ASUS Zephyrus M16 next. I'm just joking. But seriously, there are way too many G15 laptops. Like, we've got the ASUS Zephyrus G15, the ASUS Strix G15, and down here, coming up soon, we've got the Dell G15. I don't know, laptop makers, sort it out. Stop using the same names. There are plenty more letters out there than G. Anyway, the Zephyrus G15 has many improvements compared to last year's G15. They basically redesigned the entire chassis, and it's better in pretty much every way. It's got good battery life, decent temperatures, a good screen, and good speakers. So I think I'll put this one as a B for now, as it is a pretty good laptop. I think Dave2D might go with an S, but yeah, let's go with a B for now and see where it lands. Now, many people did report early on that this model had problems with the speakers popping, but I know there were a number of updates which apparently helped that for some people, but for others it didn't. I admit I haven't really followed up on it since I initially reviewed the machine many months ago, so let me know if that's still a problem. If there are still speaker popping problems, I'd probably bump it down a level. Mine had the 5900HS CPU, which is meant to be a lower powered 8-core Ryzen option, but if I remember, it could still boost up to 65 watts. So yeah, the CPU performance was actually pretty good, considering this was meant to be a thinner and lighter design, which is what the Zephyrus series is meant to be for. The gaming performance was actually pretty decent, despite the RTX 3080 graphics in mine not being anywhere near full powered, which again is expected as a thinner machine. More power equals more heat, and you can't have that without a thicker chassis generally. Unfortunately, there's no mux switch. That would have boosted gaming performance, and due to that alone, I might have even bumped this up to an A. But again, I suppose you can always attach an external screen if you do really want that performance increase. Now, I know a problem a lot of people have with this laptop, and many from the ASUS Zephyrus series, is that it has memory soldered to the motherboard. So that does affect upgradability, and I could see some people putting it as an F or E or some other low tier simply due to that. Now, I'm going to argue that it's not that much of a big deal. Yeah, it kind of sucks that you can't upgrade all the memory, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure you can get it with 16 gigs soldered to the motherboard. And the fact is, for most gaming laptops, if you have 16 gigs soldered and 16 gigs in the single SODIMM slot, you're still going to get dual channel 32 gig. And personally, I can't really see 32 gig being a capacity limit for gamers. Sure, if you're a content creator, it's a completely different story, but we're focusing on gaming in this video. And given 16 gigs is still a pretty good sweet spot today in late 2021, by the time 32 gigs is going to be a capacity issue, honestly, I think the CPU and GPU in this laptop are probably going to get replaced by some newer model anyway. So I kind of want to give it a C due to that soldered memory, but at the same time, I think people kind of blow it out of proportion, and it's not that big of a deal. Obviously, more upgradability is better, but yeah, at the same time, 32 gigs dual channel, I think you're going to be pretty sweet. Now again, this is another ASUS laptop that's missing the camera, so that might make it an automatic F tier for some. For me, I don't really care, so I think I'll leave it as B for now, but I could also see these things starting to add up, and perhaps it could be a C. But at the same time, I do also see this ahead of the G14, so I think I'll just leave it here for now. Alright, next up we've got the ASUS Zephyrus M16. So this might be one of the first gaming laptops I tested this year that used the new 16-inch panel size. So it's got a 16:10 panel, which basically means more screen real estate vertically, which is usually better for productivity and programming and stuff like that. Definitely not required for gaming by any means, and it does technically mean you have more pixels on the screen, which means you need more GPU horsepower to run your game. As a Zephyrus laptop, it is on the thinner side, but that said, if I recall, mine had outstanding temperatures considering the specs inside. Personally, I preferred this more than the G15, so it might make sense to put it as an A, but at the same time, that kind of doesn't feel right. So this model is Intel based, unlike the G15, which is AMD Ryzen. So that does mean you get faster PCIe Gen 4 storage, Thunderbolt 4, and generally better performance in games compared to AMD. But at the same time, it does also mean that battery life suffers. This laptop also doesn't have a mux switch, same with the G15, but again, you could attach an external screen if you really want that performance boost. Again, like other Zephyrus laptops, it's got soldered memory, so I guess I did just argue that that's not the end of the world, but there are a few negatives, so let's go with a B for now. Finally getting to the end of the ASUS laptops. So next up, we've got the ASUS Zephyrus S17. For now, I'm going to at least put this as an A, because this was the best 17-inch gaming laptop I tested all year. And yeah, I would say it's better than the Flow X13, the G15, and the M16. It's got a huge improvement compared to last year's S17, because last year's model had the keyboard cramped down the front and the touchpad on the right-hand side, and it was just awkward to use. With this year's model, they moved the keyboard back, and it actually raised raises when you open the laptop up, and the keyboard's also mechanical. So you get both a better angle for typing, and air can flow in underneath the keyboard, and if I recall, that improved the temperatures quite a bit. And not only that, it means the touchpad is in the regular spot, so you don't have that awkward right-hand side touchpad thing. Again, like many of the other ASUS laptops like the Flow X13, it's good to see ASUS trying different things that other companies aren't even thinking of. The S17 that I had a 4K 120Hz screen, so I think it was one of the first models I had with the high refresh rate 4K screen, and the specs inside could actually run many modern games at 4K decent settings, so that was quite impressive. At the same time though, if I recall, the 4K model didn't have a mux switch, so performance was negatively affected. But to be fair, there is also a 1440p model that does have a mux switch with G-Sync. Honestly, I don't think you really need to game at 4K, so if you are serious about gaming and you're looking at the S17, I think going for the 1440p model with mux switch makes more sense. Maybe if you also do content creation, the higher quality 4K panel with better brightness and color gamut could be a good compromise. Unfortunately, the battery life on this model wasn't great, but that's probably just due to the Intel CPU. Again, like other Zephyrus laptops, it has memory soldered to the motherboard. But as I've already argued, I don't think that's as much of a bigger deal as people make it out to be. Seriously, 16 plus 16 gigs, 32 gigs, you're probably pretty sweet for years to come. If you really do need capacity, you can install a 32 gig stick with the 16 gigs and have 48 gigs in total. You might run into some issues as you end up running asynchronous dual channel, but I've got a video coming soon where I'll be comparing all sorts of different memory sizes, so make sure you're subscribed for that. Honestly, as far as 17-inch laptops go, I could see myself putting this as an S. Like I said at the start, S doesn't mean perfect. So yeah, this might be pretty controversial, but I think I'll leave this as an S for now. I mean, the model name is S17, so it automatically should get an S. But seriously, this was the best 17-inch laptop that I tested all year, and if that doesn't deserve S tier, then I don't know what does. I just remember being constantly impressed while testing that model, but at the same time, it does also come at a higher cost. Nothing in life is free, I guess. Alright, next up we've got the Clevo X170, which came to me from Metabox, which is a reseller of Clevo laptops in Australia, but I think XMG in Europe also sell this. Now, this is a bit of a desktop replacement machine, so it comes with a desktop CPU and a full power GPU. And this is one of the few laptops where you can actually replace both the CPU and the GPU. Something I don't think you can do with any of the other 33 laptops that I reviewed this year. Seriously, the upgradability in this thing is unreal. It's got 4 M.2 slots, 4 memory slots, and even a removable battery. Granted, due to that high-end hardware, the battery ends up being pretty much useless. I basically view it as more of a UPS. So if you need to move the laptop from one table to another, you can do it without turning it off. Because yeah, the battery life is seriously terrible. But at the same time, removable battery does mean, in theory, you could buy more of them and just do a quick shutdown and swap the battery out and keep on running. So definitely a unique feature. This laptop just has crazy customization and crazy performance. I think I'm gonna have to give it at least an A. Sorry, have I been referring to this thing as a laptop? Because I definitely wouldn't want this thing sitting on my lap crushing my legs. This thing is a seriously thick and heavy laptop, so at least if you get it and carry it around regularly, you can probably cancel your gym membership. I could see myself putting this in S tier purely in terms of that raw performance, but if you're someone that cares about size and weight, then it could also be E or F tier. I don't know, as far as a desktop replacement goes, I was pretty impressed, so I think I'll leave it as at least an A. The performance is some of the best I've ever tested out of any laptop. It even rivals many desktop PCs. At least with this, you get a bit more portability compared to a desktop PC. I mean, yeah, it's still huge, but it's easy to take this thing to like a LAN party or work or something like that compared to a desktop PC. Alright, next up we've got the Dell G15. I think I'm also going to have to put this one as A, which might surprise some people because in the past, I haven't really reviewed Dell laptops that highly. It is an all-plastic build, but the build quality still felt pretty decent, all things considered. The price is also pretty reasonable, and unlike other laptops that cost more than it, it does have a mux switch and full-powered GPU. I found this one taking on more expensive models like the Legion 5. I did a comparison between the Dell G15 and the Legion 5, and in many cases, the Dell G15 did actually outperform the Legion 5. It just depends on what you're after. The 120Hz screen in mine unfortunately wasn't great, but you can upgrade that with more money, and yeah, that would obviously make it a much better screen. Unfortunately, mine came with X16 memory, which is slower, but at the same time, a number of laptops this year have, even others from ASUS, Lenovo, and other brands, so I can't really give it negative points for that, I guess. I mean, all these brands are subject to global supply shortages. Like, what are they gonna do? Make RAM out of thin air? That's just the way the world is currently. It sucks, but yeah. Like other laptops from Dell, it was on the higher side in terms of temperatures, but yeah, given the performance increase and If I remember, it wasn't like super hot or anything. I think it can stay as an A. Oh, and the battery life of the Dell G15 is the best I've ever tested from any gaming laptop ever, and that includes Ultrabooks. Seriously, this thing was crazy. So yeah, I think that justifies the A. Alright, that's our first 15 laptops. These are the next ones that we've got to cover. So first up, we've got the Eluktronics Prometheus 16. So a 16-inch Tongfang gaming laptop, and I think I'm going to give this one a C. Actually, you know what? It's got those RGB lights on the corners, so straight to S tier. No, just joking, get back to C. So this one just wasn't really a laptop that I personally enjoyed using. It's another 16-inch model, but the touchpad on it was just comically large. Seriously, it was way too big. The battery life and speakers weren't that great, and it ran pretty hot. Perhaps due to the higher power limits, because if I recall in games and content creator workloads, it did actually perform pretty well. And that might also be in part because it does have a mux switch. So yeah, performance is definitely pretty good. If we were talking purely performance, I'd be giving it at least an A, maybe even an S. But just factoring in everything else, I don't think I can see myself giving this one more than a C. Next up, we've got the Gigabyte A5, which was sent to me from XMG as the Apex 15. So the same Clevo chassis, just resold around the world by different companies. I think I'm also going to have to give this one a C too, for similar reasons. So it is a decent gaming laptop, and generally Clevo laptops are priced better compared to those main brands out there like ASUS and MSI for instance. But that does usually come at the cost of Clevo laptops having lower build quality, so just more plastic in the chassis, and also the software just seems super outdated, at least compared to Tongfang. Like, you can't even really do that much. The Tongfang software lets you modify things like CPU and GPU power limits, which is just straight up pretty cool. You know, now I'm talking about this, I mean, the Prometheus 16 is a Tongfang laptop and this is a Clevo laptop, and I've just explained why the Tongfang stuff is better than the Clevo stuff, so maybe we'll even go down to a D, especially considering this one doesn't have a mux switch like the Prometheus 16. The battery life in the Gigabyte A5 wasn't great, but yeah, like that Clevo X170 desktop replacement, it does also have a removable battery. So technically it should be possible to buy spares and you could just shut down when your battery runs low and swap in a new one, which is pretty cool. This was the first time I had a Ryzen 9 5900HX CPU, and the CPU performance was actually pretty impressive. That said, it did also have 3070 graphics and the power limit and performance wasn't that great. And it also has a USB 2.0 port in 2021. Come on. I guess it's to cut costs, but still. So yeah, let's leave it as a D for now. Alright, next up we've got the Gigabyte Aero 15 OLED. This isn't really a gaming laptop, but I did review it this year, and technically you can game on it perfectly fine, as it still does have top-end CPU and GPU. Technically, OLED screens do have awesome response time, and they're super bright, and they look great, but yeah, they're 4K and also 60Hz, so maybe not the best for gamers. And based purely on that, and the fact that this is a video about gaming laptops, I might give it an E. It kind of doesn't feel right because I really do like the Aero series, but in terms of purely being a gaming laptop, I think there would be others that I would prefer, especially as the Aero series is generally more premium and costs more money. Now that said, if you are someone that does content creation and gaming, then I would definitely put this way higher, maybe even A or S tier. But yeah, if gaming is the focus, 4K, 60Hz, just not going to make the cut. Similarly, I'm also going to put the Aero 17 as E tier for the same reason. Again, that's the laptop I'm actually recording this video on. This one has RTX 3080 graphics and an 11th gen i9 CPU, so the performance is definitely good. But yeah, again, 60Hz 4K screen. Now, that said, I have actually been playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey at 4K max settings on this thing on the weekends, and it's been handling it perfectly fine. There is a bit of ghosting on the screen, but in AAA games like that, I don't think it really matters that much compared to, say, like first-person shooter games. So I guess to some degree it also depends on the games you're playing. Because in those games like, say, Assassin's Creed, Control, Watch Dogs, these Aero laptops could easily be A tier in terms of gaming. But I know there are more games out there than that, so just factoring in that and what most gamers are probably after, I think I'll leave these as E due to those screens. But yeah, again, like the Aero 15 OLED, if you are doing content creation and gaming, definitely much higher. Alright, next up is the HP Omen 15. I think I'm going to have to give this one a B. If you caught my review of it last year, I said the Omen 15 was the second best Ryzen gaming laptop available at that time. Unfortunately, like the Acer Helios 300 in the E tier, they haven't really done anything to keep up with the competition. Fortunately, unlike the Helios 300, they haven't actively gone out of their way to make it worse. It's mostly the same laptop. Well, I suppose to be fair, this one did also have soldered Wi-Fi, so that is a bit of a downgrade compared to last year's model. But yeah, last year this would have been at least an A tier. So I think bumping it down a tier this year due to just a CPU and GPU upgrade seems fair. Also, the front edge of this laptop could feel sharp while typing, which is something that just annoyed me personally. It also doesn't have a mux switch like the Dell G15 above it, and that would boost performance. Also, the Omen 15 doesn't have full power limits like the G15, so yeah, that's my justification for why the Dell is better than the Omen. Next up, we've got the HP Victus 16. So this is meant to be more of a budget-friendly option compared to the Omen 15, but in some regards, I actually ended up liking it more than the Omen 15, particularly in terms of the keyboard. Keyboard on this laptop was surprisingly good, but at the same time, everything considered, I don't think it ends up being as good as the Omen. So based on that, let's go with a C and put it just under the Omen for now. So this laptop also doesn't have a mux switch, and it's another that came to me with a slower X16 memory. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think I can make this laptop go lower based purely on the memory that it shipped with, because a lot of other companies like Lenovo, Dell, even ASUS are all using that X16 memory. It's just supply issues. Now this laptop did have some pretty serious screen wobble. It wasn't really an issue unless you like actively move the laptop around or bump the table or something. Just typing and using it normally, it was perfectly fine. The screen in mine was pretty dim, the whites looked kind of yellow, and the response time was pretty slow despite it being a 144Hz screen. But I think you could pay like $40 or something and get a better screen, so if you're getting the Victus, that's probably worth considering. There is also a better tier 1440p option, but again, more money. I think this is better than the ASUS TUF A15, Nitro 5, and the Gigabyte below it, so yeah, I think this can stay in C tier for now. Now obviously things like these Alienware laptops are probably better than the Victus in terms of features and performance, but like I mentioned earlier, the Alienwares just have too many negatives and they're just too expensive. And yeah, I think I would also pick the Victus over other lower tier models below it like the Helios 300, and I'd definitely pick it above the TUF Dash F15. So yeah, I think C is a pretty good spot. Alright, we've finally come to the Lenovo Legion 5. This probably won't come as a surprise, but I'm gonna give this one an S. Basically, this laptop just checks a lot of boxes. Like the Dell G15 just below it, it's got the full power GPU power limit and a mux switch. But unlike the G15, I think the build quality is better, the screen's better, and like the G15, you get FreeSync with Optimus or the iGPU enabled, but the Legion 5 also gets G-Sync when Optimus is disabled. The Legion also has good upgrade options. It's got two different battery sizes, so a 60 or an 80 watt hour. So you've got the option of running with a smaller battery but a 2.5-inch drive if you want. So that's something that other laptops like say the Acer Nitro 5 and Helios 300 force you to have. Personally, I think it's better to give the user the choice. If you want to run with a smaller battery and install a hard drive, then you've got that option. But if you want the larger battery, then you've got that option too. I don't know, it's something a lot of companies aren't doing, so yeah, props to Lenovo for doing that. Unfortunately, mine did come with X16 memory, so based on that, I did consider bumping it down to an A, but yeah, at the same time, as mentioned earlier, that's kind of just a supply issue that Lenovo isn't really responsible for. You can upgrade it yourself, of course, but obviously that does increase the cost. Again, like I said at the start, S tier isn't meant to be perfect. It's just meant to represent the best laptops that I've tested this year, and I think the Legion 5 definitely fits the bill. If I had to find more negatives with it, it does also have a relatively large 300 watt power brick, but you can use Type-C charging if you're on the go, and you can also get a lower 230 watt brick, I think. Just don't expect full performance. But there are options if you don't want to carry around a giant power brick. Oh, and perhaps most importantly, this laptop has been on sale at Micro Center in the US for as low as $1,300 with the RTX 3060, which is seriously just impressive value. With all the supply shortages and price increases this year, if you can find a Legion 5 for $1,300 with a 3060, it's definitely worth buying. Alright, next up is the Lenovo Legion 5i. So technically this is meant to be the same as the Legion 5 that I just covered, the difference being the I, which stands for Intel, so Intel CPU should in theory be the only difference. And if that was the case, I'd be putting this with the other Legion 5 in S tier, because I have found Intel to outperform AMD in games. So combined with the mux switch and full-powered RTX 3060 graphics, this should do better in games compared to the other Legion 5 that I've got as S tier, while also giving us the benefits of Thunderbolt 4 and faster PCIe Gen 4 storage, which is something that the AMD Ryzen 5000 platform currently does not support. Now with that said, unfortunately I didn't have the 15-inch version of the Legion 5i. I had the 17-inch model, and I had some problems with it. And based on those problems, I'm gonna go with either an E or a D. It kind of of feels wrong to put it on the same tier as the Helios 300. At the same time, it also seems better than, say, the Nitro 5 or the Gigabyte. So maybe actually we might go with the C for now. Pretty much the only benefits you get from this being a 17-inch laptop is the larger screen. And for some people, that's all they'll care about. So sure, put it back in S tier if that's all you're after. But personally, I was pretty disappointed with this as far as 17-inch laptops go. It seems like they just took the 15-inch chassis and stretched out to 15-inch without making any changes. There was wasted space inside, which could have been used for a bigger battery, improved cooling, or maybe even a third M.2 slot. And if I'm buying a bigger laptop, those are the types of things I want to see, not just unused wasted space. Also, as an Intel model, the battery doesn't last as long as the AMD model, so that would be another negative. And also, due to that larger 17-inch size, I found that the keyboard and touchpad were kind of just pushed back a bit too far. I was constantly having to just feel like I was reaching too far to actually get to them. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, I'd go to use the laptop, start typing, and then I'd be like, oh, I'm in the wrong spot. I need to move back more, just because I don't know, they just didn't utilize the extra space present with a 17-inch laptop properly. The 17-inch version also didn't have G-Sync like the 15-inch version, so that's probably just due to the panel difference between 15 and 17-inch. But yeah, it is a feature that isn't there, and it's worth noting. Okay, next is the Lenovo Legion 5 Pro. So I think if I gave the regular 5 an S, I'm probably going to have to automatically give this one an S too, because essentially it's just a beefed up version of the Legion 5. And this is also another 16-inch model like the ASUS Zephyrus M16. So you get that 16:10 screen. I think they might be using the same panel. Can't remember exactly, but either way, it looks pretty nice. But unlike the M16, this has a mux switch, so you can get that performance boost by swapping to the discrete graphics, and you still get G-Sync. Unfortunately, it does have X16 memory like the Legion 5, but as I've already said, I'm not going to let that affect these ratings. You can upgrade it. It sucks that you don't get optimal memory when you're paying this much money for a new gaming laptop, but at the same time, that's just 2021 for you. Okay, next we've got the Legion 7, which, based on the name, is a higher tier than the Legion 5 Pro. So unfortunately, there's no tiers higher than S. So you think based on that, we would automatically put this in S, but I'm actually going to stick this in A, below the Legion 5 and below the Legion 5 Pro, despite those being cheaper models. Now, don't get me wrong, the 7 is generally better than those two laptops. It's got more features, and yeah, that RGB light bar on the front is something a lot of people want, I'm sure. Basically, I think a lot of the things that the Legion 7 has compared to the 5 Pro are just extra bells and whistles that aren't really critical, like that RGB lighting, and I think one of the ports on the right is Type-C instead of Type-A. The chassis is a little different, but overall in terms of the feature set, basically you're paying more for some small features. But the real reason that I'm putting the Legion 7 down a tier from S is because that Corsair iQ software. Seriously, this is something that's existed since the Legion 7i last year, which I must have reviewed more than a year ago now, maybe even closer to 18 months at this point. And the fact that it's still not fixed is just honestly impressive, in a bad way. In case you didn't see my Legion 7 review, basically they use the Corsair iQ software to manage all of that RGB lighting that the laptop's covered in, and for some reason it just drains the battery extremely fast. I mean, you can fix it pretty easily, you just have to stop some services, and then the battery life pretty much doubles. So it just goes to show how garbage the software is. But the fact that they haven't fixed it after all this time is kind of just embarrassing. And it's probably the biggest caveat I have with recommending this laptop anytime anyone asks me about it. Seriously, if they fixed that one problem, I'd put the Legion 7 straight up to S tier. Now that said, I think the Legion 5 Pro goes up to 3070 graphics, while the Legion 7 goes up to 3080. So if you are really after that higher tier GPU, the Legion 7 might be your only option. Next up is MSI's Delta 15. So this is one of the only gaming laptops currently on the market that uses both AMD CPU and AMD GPU. If I recall, it's the only one with the RX 6700M, which is AMD's middle tier option between the 6600M and the 6800M in that ASUS Strix G15 advantage. So the problem with this one I had mainly was the price. So at Best Buy, I think it's like $1,600 or $1,700 US or something, but it does often go on sale, and I did see it for $1,300 US like a week or two ago, which is actually pretty good value. Generally, I've found AMD's RX 6700M graphics to do a bit better than Nvidia's RTX 3060. So I mean, if you can get better performance than an RTX 3060 for $1,300 US, that's pretty good. And you know, just based on that, I think I would put it in B. That That said, if there's no sale and you're paying full price at $1,600 or $1,700, I'd definitely be bumping it down to a C, maybe even a D, because at that price, it's just not worth it. Only get it if you can get it on sale. Unfortunately, this laptop doesn't come with a mux switch, so if it did have a mux switch, the performance might be even better, but again, you can always attach an external screen. Surprisingly, mine actually shipped to me with the faster X8 memory, so that would help boost the performance compared to other models that ship with slower X16 memory, but yeah, again, I'm not letting the memory be too much of a justification in my rankings. I mean, I have no idea if all Delta 15s have that faster memory. It might be possible because maybe they just made such a small amount that MSI was able to dedicate enough of the faster RAM for them, or maybe it just varies by region and some countries have slow memory and some are fast. This laptop did also have the flipped motherboard, so if you want to upgrade it, it wasn't too hard. You just have to spend some time being careful and unplugging a bunch of stuff on the motherboard. You'll only really need to do it if you need to change the RAM or add another SSD. So a bit of an inconvenience, and I could potentially drop it down to a C, but yeah, it wasn't that hard. It just takes a bit longer. And realistically, how many times are you gonna upgrade the RAM and SSD? It's probably something most people will only do once. This is meant to be a thinner design, so I did find some cases where the lower tier RX 6600M actually ended up beating it, but for the most part, the 6700M was pretty impressive. Something that got me though is, while this is meant to be a thinner laptop for portability, you think it would have Type-C charging, right? Because it sounds like those would go hand in hand. If you're on the go, you don't want to take the full power brick with you. But for some reason, this didn't have Type-C charging, so that kind of sucked. The advanced BIOS is something that MSI do quite well on all their laptops. So you can get into the BIOS and press a shortcut, which I've got in my review, and you get access to basically everything, which is something a lot of companies don't give you access to, so that's pretty nice. Oh, and like other AMD gaming laptops, the battery life on this was next level. All the negatives and positives considered, I think I'll leave this one as a B for now. Alright, next up we've got MSI's GE76, which was one of the most powerful gaming laptops I tested so far. This one's kind of more like a desktop replacement, I suppose, because it is on the bigger side, like that Clevo X170 I put in A tier. The GE76 isn't quite as big as that. It doesn't have a desktop CPU, and there's also no MXM graphics, so you can't upgrade the CPU and GPU. You're stuck with what you got and it's soldered to the motherboard. I mean, to be fair, that is the case with literally every other laptop I'm comparing in this video, except for that desktop replacement Clevo X170, so I can't really take too many points away from it if no one else is doing it. I mean, at the same time, the performance isn't as good as the X170, and once your laptop's already this big and heavy, I mean, you kind of want that better performance. So I might go B tier, just because that's one under A, where I put that X170. Now with the GE76, you do get a mux switch and full powered graphics. If I recall, I had an RTX 3080 with 150 watt power limit, and yeah, the performance was pretty good, especially with the Intel 11th gen CPU. As I've mentioned before, generally I find Intel to do better than AMD in games. And that does also mean you get Thunderbolt 4 and faster PCIe Gen 4 storage, something that AMD does not offer. But as a result of those higher specs, and as a result of Intel CPUs, you don't get as great battery life or as great performance when running on battery compared to AMD. So that's always the trade-off between AMD and Intel, just depends what you're after. It would be cool if MSI made an AMD GE76, then at least you get to pick what you want, but this is all we've got for now. And while the gaming performance on this model is good, the CPU-only performance, like say if you're just running Cinebench or something, was actually quite low. But that said, like I said with the Delta 15, you get access to MSI's advanced BIOS, so you can probably go in there and tweak all the power limits of the CPU and stuff, so I suspect that's probably something you could improve. Alright, next we've got MSI's Katana GF66, also known as the Sword 15. This is meant to be more of a budget-friendly gaming laptop, though when I reviewed it, the price was higher than it should have been. I would say this is in competition with Acer's Nitro 5, at least in terms of build quality and stuff, but I think the GF66 was better than the Nitro 5, so I'll put this in C for now. Now the screen on the GF66 did actually surprise me. The response time was decent, and I think it was bright enough, and the color gamut was pretty good. I just remember the screen was above average for what a laptop like this should have. But again, as mentioned, the price was also higher than it should have been. It is another all-plastic gaming laptop like the Nitro 5, but the battery in this was pretty rubbish. The lower power limits can also hold back performance, but this did also result in lower temperatures if you boost the fan speed, so I guess that's always a trade-off. Like the MSI Delta 15, this did also have the faster X8 memory. So yeah, not sure if MSI just have a lot of faster X8 memory saved up or what the deal is there. So I definitely picked this over the Acer Nitro 5. So yeah, based on that, it needs to at least be C tier, because I can't put it with D. At the same time, like, all these other laptops in front of it in C tier are probably better than the GF66. So it's kind of awkward. Maybe we need like a something in between C and D to put the GF66. Let's just go like that. I don't know, let's leave it in C for now. I mean, just because all those other laptops in C are technically better doesn't mean the GF66 can't also be a C. I mean, they're different categories of laptops. Like, most of these cost more money, while the GF66 is meant to be more budget friendly. I haven't really been factoring in cost as I go, because I guess the goal of this comparison wasn't about price point, it's just about the laptops overall. So I guess based on that, if we did have the perfect budget gaming laptop, it could be an S. So yeah, I think we'll leave that as C for now. All right, next up we've got MSI's GP76. So this was very similar to the higher tier GE76, to the point where I think I titled my review of the GP76 something about it being a budget-friendly GE76. So based purely on that, I think it's going to have to go under the GE76. So let's stick it in C for now and talk about it. So unlike the higher tier GE76, the GP76 has a smaller battery, less ports, it's got Wi-Fi 6 instead of 6E, granted that is like only a $20 upgrade, and it also doesn't have the all-important light bar like the GE76. So straight to F. No, I'm just joking. It's still got the good core features of the GE76, like the mux switch and the high power limit graphics. So the performance in games is still quite good. You're just paying less money and not getting as good features. So I guess in terms of that, I mean, if your priority is just getting the most FPS in games per dollar, then, you know, technically you could put this as an A and have it ahead of the GE76. But I think there's more to it than that. Like, having all the different features and extras does add something. So yeah, I think I'll leave it lower and leave it as a C for now. I guess if I moved the GE76 up to an A, and then we could put the GP76 as a B, but then it doesn't really work because I want the GE76 to be below the Clevo. So yeah, I guess not a perfect ordering, but I think this is as good as I can make it for now. Too many variables. All right, another MSI laptop, the GS76. So this is meant to be a thinner design with a 17-inch screen. The main problem that I had with it is that while thinner is obviously good for portability, once you go 17 inches, the laptop needs to be fairly big anyway, so it's going to take up a fair amount of space regardless. Maybe I just don't care that much about smaller size, so for me personally, this one wasn't that great. So I might actually go with a D for this one. But that said, I could also be convinced to put it as a C. The GS76 does at least have a mux switch, though the screen doesn't have G-Sync, which I guess isn't required. It's just kind of nice to have once you've got a mux switch, because in order to actually use G-Sync, you need to have a mux switch. So you can have a mux switch without G-Sync, but you can't have G-Sync without a mux switch. So it feels like they kind of just went halfway and not the whole way. I found the touchpad on the GS76 a bit small compared to others, and the keyboard lighting was a bit dim. It's got that full-size 99.9 watt-hour battery, but despite that, I guess due to the Intel CPU, the battery life wasn't that impressive. It's an all-metal chassis, but that does also have the negative of conducting heat. So as soon as you start running any workloads, basically anywhere you touch, the laptop feels kind of warm and uncomfortable. So a plus to those plastic budget laptops. Oh, and like the Delta 15, the GS76 also has an upside-down motherboard, so a bit more difficult in terms of upgradability. I don't know, I guess if this was the 15-inch GS66, which is basically the same, just a bit smaller, I might go the C tier. Now that I'm thinking about it, a GS66 is probably the same as the Delta 15, it's just that the Delta 15 is Radeon graphics rather than NVIDIA. Granted, the Delta doesn't have a mux switch. I don't know, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe the Delta should be a C. It is priced well, I'll leave it there for now. Anyway, GS76, I think it can stay with a D for now, because yeah, I think the GP76 is better as far as a 17-inch laptop goes. Alright, 4 more laptops left to sort through, and we're up to the last from MSI, which is the Stealth 15M. So this is kind of like the TUF Dash F15. I just realized F15, F tier, makes sense. Anyway, this is meant to be more of a thinner laptop design, so it does also have a quad-core CPU, which isn't great, but at the same time, I think this is better than the TUF Dash F15. So based on that, let's stick it in E for now and talk about it. So the Stealth 15M does have an upside-down motherboard, which just seems to be what MSI do to all their thin laptops, like the GS76 and Delta 15. As a thinner laptop, it does end up being fairly expensive, and as I said before, that's just the way tech works, right? More expensive and higher tier hardware equals more cost. The problem is, with that thinner design, you just get lower power limits, which equals less performance. At least the Stealth does at least have a camera, unlike the ASUS. So I guess there's positives and negatives when comparing the Dash F15 and the Stealth. You know what, they're both quad-core gaming laptops in 2021, so I think I'll stick them both as F. But like that said, just because they're both F doesn't mean I think they're exactly the same. If I had to pick between those two, I think I'd go for the MSI over the ASUS. Alright, next up is the Blade 14, which you might think I should have gone through earlier if this is in alphabetical order. But it's because we're going by brand name, and Razer starts with an R, so it's towards the end. So I think for the Blade 14, I'm going to go with a B, and that's simply because that's one tier above the ASUS Zephyrus G14, which I ended up putting as a C. And I have done a dedicated comparison comparing the Zephyrus G14 and Blade 14, and in general, I think the Blade 14 is a better machine. But at the same time, it does also cost a lot more money. The G14 and the Blade 14 are the only 14-inch gaming laptops I tested this year, but the Blade 14 impressed me way more. It's got an 8-core Ryzen 9 5900HX CPU, and it goes up to NVIDIA RTX 3080 graphics. Now, obviously it does have a lower power limit in order to fit that in a thinner 14-inch chassis, but the performance was actually pretty decent all things considered, and it did significantly beat the G14, which tops out with an RTX 3060. Plus, no one's forcing you to buy the 3080 version of the Blade. You could always get a 3060 one as well. I just thought the build quality was nice, and yeah, it's the best 14-inch gaming laptop you can currently get. Like I said with the Zephyrus G14, you only really want to consider paying more if portability is absolutely what you need. Otherwise, you can spend less money on a cheaper 15-inch gaming laptop and probably get better performance. So it just comes down to what your priority is. But as far as a 14-inch model goes, yeah, I'm going to give it at least a B. Alright, next up we've got the Neo 15 from XMG in Europe, which is also sold in the US market from Eluktronics as the Mech-15 G3. And this was one of the first RTX 30 series laptops that I ever covered this year. And if I recall, I said it was going to be one to beat, and I wasn't wrong, because even after doing most of these other laptops after the Neo 15, the Neo 15 still holds up extremely well. There's just not much to hate about this laptop. It's got a good 1440p screen, full powered graphics, a mux switch, and the all-important RGB light bar on the front. As it's a Tongfang chassis, like I said before, you also get the option to customize CPU and GPU power limits through the software, so that's a nice bonus. It's also got 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, good build quality, mechanical keyboard, relatively large 93 watt-hour battery, SD card slot. It's available with both Intel and AMD CPUs, so you can pick if you prefer the better battery life of Ryzen or better gaming performance and Thunderbolt of Intel. It's packing basically everything except the kitchen sink. It might even have that too if you look close enough. So I think I'm gonna have to stick this in S. Seriously, it's just a great gaming laptop. One of the better higher end options currently out there. Unfortunately, I don't think it has G-Sync, but I guess that's not the end of the world. And to be fair, it is a higher cost, but like I said before, I'm not really factoring in cost too much in this ranking. Purely in terms of the performance on offer and all the features, yeah, there's just not that much wrong with this laptop, so S tier. The next laptop is the XPG Xenia 15. So this is basically another Tongfang laptop, and it's kind of like the newer version of the popular Mag 15 from Eluktronics a couple of years ago. So this also does a lot right. It's very similar to the XMG Neo 15 in a lot of regards. The only things that I really noticed that were different is that it doesn't have a mux switch, and for some reason you don't get fan control through the software. So a couple of negatives, and I think that takes it down to at least an A compared to the superior Neo 15. It is also pretty pricey, but again, there's just not that much negative with it, so I think I'll give it at least an A. Alright, so those are all my laptop rankings. Obviously, feel free to disagree with me, but just know that if you do, then you're wrong. Obviously, I'm joking, but if you would have done something different to me, then let me know down in the comments. If you want more details on any of these 34 laptops that I just ranked, then check out the links in the description below, as I've got full reviews on all of these models that go into far more depth. And of course, there's also updated pricing for all of these laptops there as well. Make sure you get subscribed for all of my upcoming laptop review videos in 2022. I've already locked in some Intel 12th gen models, and you definitely don't want to miss those.